History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump Redux. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going back to a location we did in 2015, the Eloise Asylum.
Looking forward to it.
This place is crazy haunted, and the really cool thing is, back when we did this originally, we had a writer join us named Bill Clayton, and he would write about some of the folklore in Detroit. And so he talked a little bit about Eloise Asylum, but back then, it was abandoned, it was closed up, you couldn't go in there, you couldn't see anything. Well, now it is open, you can do investigations, they have tours, and Expedition X has been inside and shared it with us.
Love it. We need to add it to our list of places to investigate.
Absolutely. So we're looking forward to bringing this to everyone. Are you ready to go back, Kelly?
I'm ready. Like so many other asylums that started in the early 1800s, this was first a poor farm and then became an asylum, sanatorium, and psychiatric hospital. At its height, the facility stretched out over 900 acres, with 78 buildings, making it the largest psychiatric facility in America. Eloise became a decaying former mental hospital, but is today a haunted attraction with escape rooms, and it hosts historical tours and paranormal investigations. Stories of spectral activity are numerous, and this is one of the most haunted places in the Detroit area. Join us as we explore the history and hauntings of the Eloise Asylum.
The term asylum brings about many images, and most of them are not pleasant, particularly the asylums of years ago. Today we know more about mental illness and have better plans for caring for people, but in the past, mentally ill people were treated as cast-offs, and it was permissible to do horrid things to these people. One of the most notorious asylums in America was Eloise Asylum. The Wayne County Poorhouse was organized in 1832 at Gratiot and Mount Elliott Avenues in Hamtramck Township. The building was quickly outgrown and conditions had grown poor, so 280 acres were purchased in Nankin Township in 1839. There was just one problem with this new location. Nearly all of the residents didn't want to move to the new location because they considered it the wilderness. Only 35 people initially transferred.
The keeper's quarters was located in a log building already on the property that had been a stagecoach stop called the Black Horse Tavern, and an A-frame building was constructed to serve as a house for the inmates. An A-frame cookhouse was added to the back of the tavern. The Black Horse Tavern building was sold in 1843, and a brick building was built on the land in 1845. The poorhouse changed its name to Wayne County Almshouse in 1872. By 1886, that had changed to Wayne County House. The farm was its own self-sustaining community with a bakery, amusement hall, laundry facility, post office, and a power plant. There were dairy herds, dairy barns, a piggery, root cellar, tobacco curing building, and greenhouses. The property even had its own police and fire departments and a railway and trolley system. 300 fruit trees were planted.
So it was basically its own little city there. A little over 7 years after it opened, the Poor Farm also became a hospital. Most of the patients had mental illness. Healthcare and punishment were both doled out here, with unruly patients being chained to the wall to keep them in line. Stanislaus M. Keenan was a county worker who wrote The History of Eloise in 1913, and in it he described, quote, the chained unfortunates roaring and shrieking in discord. The hospital pioneered treatments like electroshock therapy, insulin shock therapy, music therapy, and occupational therapy. The equipment was state-of-the-art at the time. People would come from Detroit to get x-rays done. Eloise also had the first kidney dialysis unit in the state of Michigan, so there was some really good things here, and then there was some really awful things. And if you keep in mind this has a bunch of buildings, people don't know what's going on in all of the different areas. Eventually, the place became overcrowded and burdened, and another building was constructed. At its height, Eloise would have 78 buildings, with only 5 of them remaining today. It's a lot of demolished buildings.
The Board of Superintendents of the Poor adopted the name Eloise Hospital in 1911. When it came to coming up with this name, lists were put together that first entailed superintendents that had served a long time. None of those names seemed good, so another list was put together of all the superintendents. Those were rejected as well. The next list contained all the wives of the superintendents, and these names proved to be too long or too similar to other post office names. The president of the board was named Freeman B. Dickerson, and he had a 4-year-old daughter named Eloise. He put it out there, and it was agreed to, and the post office on the property was established under the name Eloise in July of 1894.
By the 1920s, criminals were also being housed on the property that were deemed criminally insane. Death was rampant here due to the various illnesses that patients suffered from, like tuberculosis. But treatments also killed people like 10-year-old Harmonia Kiosane. This is the actual newspaper clipping talking about her. Child is drowned in bath at Eloise, probed to be held in death at hospital. The death of 10-year-old Harmonia Kiosane, an epileptic patient in Eloise Hospital, Saturday afternoon while she was taking a tub bath, was attributed to drowning by Dr. Werner C. Kirsten, Wayne County medical examiner, following an autopsy. Coroner Edmund C. Knobloch announced after Dr. Kirsten's findings that an investigation would be started to determine whether there had been any negligence on the part of hospital attendants. Dr. Thomas K. Gruber, superintendent of Eloise, made an investigation and at its conclusion declared that the girl had been attended in the bathroom during the fatal bath. The room is large, he said, and the attendant was in another part of the room. When the girl's plight became known, Dr. Gruber said the attendant immediately took her from the tub, and physicians worked over her for several hours in an attempt to revive her. The girl's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Kiosane, 4060 Toledo Avenue, said that the girl had been afflicted for 2 years and had been in Eloise for a year with the exception of 2 weeks during the Christmas holidays. Kiosane has been unemployed for 3 years, he said, and has been on the welfare rolls for 2 years. So just a very tragic circumstance, and considering that she was epileptic, she might have been having a seizure and then went into the tub and drowned.
Yeah, I would imagine. Other inmates committed suicide. In 1931, Building D, also known as the K. Beard Building, was constructed, and this is one of the only buildings still left on the Eloise property. The other decaying buildings were demolished in the mid-1980s. Farm operations ceased in 1958. Psychiatric care ended at Eloise in 1979. The last psychiatric patients were transferred out in 1982. The General Hospital closed in 1984, and there sat this once immense psychiatric treatment complex abandoned with over 7,000 bodies in the cemetery. This is like a large potter's field, as most bodies remain nameless. Plots have been marked with bricks that had numbers painted on them. Records were lost long ago. But starting in 2023, members of the Westland Historic Village started working on trying to identify burials. It's been difficult as bodies were stacked on top of each other. There were some well-known people who spent time here. Inventor Elijah McCoy may be its most famous former resident. He spent a year prior to his death as a patient in the Eloise Infirmary. There were other well-known people who died at Eloise, including several baseball players. Among them are Jewel Custis, Larry Lejeune, Charlie Krause, and Marty Kavanaugh. Musician Horace Flinders was also a patient and received music therapy.
The hauntings here are said to be dangerous. John Hambrick and Adam Hoffman bought the property in 2018 for $1, and they immediately noticed that things were unsettling on the property. And the way this came about, John Hambrick is a big real estate guy and invests in properties and buys them up. And the city had come to him. I think it was one of his buddies or something was on the board and was like, we've been trying to sell this property for a really long time. We've been getting no bites. Would you like to buy it?
For $1?
Yeah, we'll give it to you for $1. And he was like, wow, what a deal. But he didn't realize not only does it have the hauntings on it, but you got to pay to mow the place, liability insurance, all of this refurb. So he found out it is a lot of money to upkeep. That's why they wanted to get rid of it, because it was just too much for him. John's daughter, Yvonne, felt someone pull her hair when they were walking around the halls of the abandoned asylum. Adam saw a shadowy figure moving along the ceiling. This quite possibly might be the most sinister entity on the property that has been nicknamed the Creeper. You know, every place has got
always
one.
a creeper.
Yeah. But stories of unexplained activity go back for decades. Government employees have seen apparitions. One woman claimed to have seen a brown-haired woman in a window several times. Lights have turned off and on by themselves. Disembodied growls and moans have been heard. Channel 4 in Detroit joined the Michigan Ghost Hunter Society on a ghost hunt, and before it even got dark, they captured an entity in a window. The elevator was uncooperative, as if someone else were controlling it.
Strange orbs of light were captured, different colors and different sizes. Screams have been heard in the hallways, and singing from rooms that have no occupants has been heard. Police who have visited have claimed to see shadow figures as well. Retired Sergeant Richard Brooks heard disembodied footsteps, and he and his canine unit chased a shadow figure throughout the building. Paranormal investigator Ryan Sherwin claimed to see a full-body shadow figure watching him from afar. Another Ryan with the last name Eberhardt is a historian for Westlake, and he went into Building D one day to see if he could figure out which room had been the one where they conducted television therapy.
I would do that kind of therapy all day long.
Television therapy?
Yeah, they would just put him in a room watching TV.
Okay. When he got to the 3rd floor, he felt something like a finger poke him in his back and push him in the direction he was supposed to go. Once he got to a particular room, the sensation went away.
So I guess he found the room. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Here's an account by Nightwolf. By the time I was in my teenage I want to be scared stage, there were only 3 dilapidated buildings left standing on the hospital side of Michigan Avenue. The piggery, cannery, and the train depot were left on the farm side of the avenue. My friends and I were very taken with the buildings and had toured them many a late night. We always contained a sense of well-being upon entering, and though we had seen many cops patrolling the area, they had never seen us and we were never caught. Upon entering the first of the many steel doors in the back area of the old hospital building itself, you could either go directly downstairs or directly up. We chose to go down first. In the ruined basement, our flashlights played upon 5-foot-tall, metal crib-like enclosures and a metal straight-back chair with leather straps on the armrests and legs. Turning an immediate right, you face the morgue, complete with pull-out drawers and metal table with leather padding. One other room in the basement we found disturbing. We were never sure what it would have been called. The room was about 8 by 6, and along the left side there was a cell with a swinging door, leaving just enough room to walk. Contained in the cell was a metal cot bolted to the wall and a place where the toilet had once been. When the cell door suddenly slammed behind me as I searched, I quickly ran out.
I don't blame him. Travel Channel's Expedition X took us all inside during Season 6 in 2023, and this was such an amazing undertaking that not only did Josh Gates join his team on this one, but the investigation there was spread out over 2 episodes. We learn as the group interviews the owner, John, that he has familial connections to the building. His grandmother and uncle worked there. His cousin was there, and his dad died there. The main building is Building D, which was the administration building. Much of the interior lobby still looks the same, with the intake window still marked with a metal sign. Patients would hang out in this building for a couple weeks as it was decided what they needed and which building to house them within. John explains that he had ascertained that there are people stuck here that include children, but that there also is something that enjoyed the torture that was inflicted on people, and that it remains. The 5th floor is said to be the most haunted. This had been maximum security in the day. Many women have bad experiences on that floor, including Yvonne, who was choked by something that felt physical. The nurse's station is on this floor and is haunted by a nurse who appears in the windows often, and this would be the first thing the team would experience.
So Jess, Phil, and Josh decide to start on the 5th floor, and they barely get up there before Jess cries out that she just saw a woman. The figure peeked around the wall and then pulled back. But even stranger, the minute they got on the 5th floor, we were having trouble hearing Josh. And so I was like, why is he whispering all of a sudden? I know people, when they go in and they're investigating places, they whisper sometimes, which makes sense if you have other people trying to investigate in the building and you don't want to disturb them or contaminate their evidence.
Right.
But when it's just you, do you think that the spirits can't hear you if you're whispering? Or so I was like, why is he whispering all of a sudden? And then Phil asked if he was okay because it sounded like he lost his voice. And sure enough, when Josh tries speaking more forcefully, his voice sounds like he suddenly caught a cold.
Oh, weird.
So that's exactly what it sounded like, as if somebody was starting to get a little bit of laryngitis. So they decided to use Josh as human bait to attract the nurse up there. They're like,
All
hey, we got a sick person here. They set up 3 REM pods. They put one inside the room that the nurse is usually seen in, one in the doorway, and then there was one over where Jess had seen the figure to begin with. The REM pods started going off simultaneously. Then they caught a figure on the SLS camera right above one of the REM pods, and when the figure disappeared, the REM pod stopped going off. They did debunk seeing a figure in the window because Jess reflected like a ghostly figure in the window. She'd gone down the hallway and she wanted to use the SLS to see if they would catch anything from a distance. And all of a sudden, Phil goes, look at the window. And Josh was standing in the window, so they wanted to see if they would see another figure, come up next to him like the nurse. And Jess sure looked like a ghostly figure standing next to him because she was reflecting in the window.
Interesting.
So it's possible if people aren't really paying attention, trying to debunk something, all of a sudden they see something in the window and it's like, yeah, get out of here and run.
Sure.
So it quite possibly could be they're just seeing a reflection. Despite that, Jess goes, I know I saw something and these REM pods are going off and they're doing it simultaneously. So something is happening here. Later, they all heard a loud noise coming from the elevator shaft, and it must have made the cameraman jump because the whole picture jumped at the same time. So they're all going,
wow.
whoa, and the picture shakes. So I'm like, well, the cameraman had to have jumped too while they all jumped. There is no elevator in the shaft anymore. The creeper is said to like to travel through the elevator shaft. Josh and Phil rappel through the shaft. I'm like, why? They both seemed like they were terrified while they were doing it. I would have been terrified just because that's not my thing. They all hear a whistle. Jess got out the spirit box and they got insane and creeper.
Oh.
Which both would go with this. Then a little later, there is the clear sound of an elevator ding, which I thought was an added sound effect because, these things do that all the time. All these shows, they'll put in like some kind of weird boom or creepy music or a creepy sound. And you're like, did they capture that on camera? Is that some kind of effect they've added? So I just assumed that they threw in an elevator ding because they're going down an elevator shaft. But then all 3 of them went, did you hear that? And they were like, yeah, it sounded like a mechanical. Did somebody's phone go off? And then they were like, no, that sounded like the ding of an elevator. I immediately was like, oh, that was an elevator ding the minute I heard it. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool. Jess hung out on the 5th floor alone, and she got a pretty bad scratch on her neck. She was taunting at the time.
Which you shouldn't do.
The next day, a contractor told Jess and Phil that he had been pushed down the stairs in the basement while carrying a saw. Yikes.
Yeah, and it wasn't a really long stairway. It was about 6 stairs, but still, to go from the top to the bottom.
With a saw in your hand.
He was like, I'm lucky I didn't break my neck.
A coworker experienced the same thing at another time, also carrying a saw. This contractor was told that the caretaker of the building for decades had lived down in the basement and that people think his spirit is now there and doesn't like people in his domain. Jess and Phil wandered through a maze of tunnels down in the basement and something pretty creepy with a shadow moved at the end of one tunnel. Diane at first thought it was just a shadow thrown by some pipes or something, but then it pulled back around the corner, so something definitely threw that shadow.
The best part of the show came when Josh had gone into town to get some more history on it, and they showed him a bunch of death records. And on the death records, not only did it say how these people died, and obviously there was a lot of bad stuff, you had your suicides and other things like that. And I mean, even people who were slitting their own throats and things like that, which is just horrible. But he goes, well, some of these show that they've gone back home and they've been buried in this cemetery or whatever. Then he goes, some of these other ones just say Eloise and then they have a number. And the guy goes, that's because they're buried in our cemetery here. And Josh, I don't know how much they know ahead of time, but he acted shocked like he didn't know there was a cemetery there.
Gotcha.
And he was like, well, I didn't see a cemetery. And the guy was like, well, it's because it's completely overgrown. We don't even know where the stones are at. So the grass has literally grown over the stones. So you can't even see them.
Oh.
The Historical Society's been going out there and trying to clear some of them, which means that they literally have to dig into the ground. So Josh gets Jess and Phil to come out and meet him out there, and they have just a little metal pole that they're going through the ground and tapping it down to see if they can find something that's hard. Josh had taken, I don't know, he had a little binder. He made a bunch of copies, and most of the ones that he had were in the 400s. They went to an area that had already been dug up by the Historical Society, and those were in the thousands. So he's like, okay, well, probably over there. And this is a huge field, very long. Probably over there's where we might find stuff. So they go down a little ways. They find a 600 one. So they go down a little more ways and they finally hit a 400 one. They go down a little bit further from that and they get very close to one that he might have in the book. They're like, if we could just go 5 more spots, we might be able to find this particular person. So what happened is Phil goes, well, if I just lay down a typical person, 6 feet, we'll measure it off that way. So that's what they did. He just laid down and they measured it off him. And then they find this other stone. They uncover it. And the name there that goes with the number was Thomas Albert. He was a butcher from Belgium who died of tuberculosis at the hospital in 1920. So I thought that was just really cool. They gave a name to a number. They did an EVP session out there, but they didn't play it back. And Josh just said, well, we can listen to that later and see if we catch anything. And as far as I know, they didn't catch anything. Although I do have to say, another one of the better parts too, a close second to this moment, is when they got Harmonia to come through the geoport. So this is the little 10-year-old girl.
Oh, wow.
She said she was there. They'd gone into the room where she had passed away. She said she was there. And when asked how old she was, the clear answer was a 10. I mean, I love it when this stuff comes through because you're sitting there going, that is not something that came across the radio station at the same time they asked her age. And bingo, that's how old she was. So it's like she's either the one who's responding or something that knows something about her is responding. Even skeptical Phil was shocked. I mean, he doesn't believe that anything's a haunting. He tries to write everything off. Through this whole thing, his mind was getting blown. And Josh is not a real big ghost person either. And they both were just like, whoa. Jess asked if she had touched her on the leg earlier, and she said yes. And when they asked what she wanted, unfortunately, she said help. Jess had shared some behind-the-scenes stuff on Instagram, so I'd been following along on this before the shows had dropped and stuff. There was Josh's voice loss, and apparently he did end up with this really bad cold, but I'm like, how do you go from sounding perfectly fine on the first floor to going up to the 5th floor and your voice is gone?
Right.
Unless they filmed it, days apart, possibly. I don't know. We don't know how this production stuff works. I don't always trust everything. So maybe they made something out of it. But apparently Phil also had horrible migraines every time they were in the building. And this guy is skeptical, a scientist, and every time he would go in there. And then Jess suffered nosebleeds off and on. And she said she'd had that problem when she was younger, but had never had that problem recently. And all of that stuff went away after they left Eloise.
Scott Porter is a paranormal investigator who starred in Fox Nation's Secrets of the Asylum in October 2023. We haven't seen that.
Yeah, we haven't seen that one yet, so I don't know what all he caught there. I did get to see a 5-minute segment from the very beginning of it, and basically it was just the 2 owners sharing the stories that I had seen on Expedition X. If you guys have seen it, let us know. Did he catch any other kind of stuff? It does make me wonder, since they have made this into a haunted attraction as well, if that's stirred up some stuff and whatnot. Some former residents find it hard to leave. Have the bad experiences of some patients led to negative energy and hauntings on the property? Bodies have been disturbed and built over. Has this caused spirits to be at unrest? This is a very physical place, it seems. Pretty much everything they got were things that you couldn't really prove with scientific stuff. It was just them talking about what was happening. Is the Eloise Asylum haunted? That is for you to decide. Well, definitely a place to check out. If you guys are in the Detroit area, go check it out. At least do one of the historical tours during the day.
Definitely.
I had commented when Jess had posted that it had dropped that I was so excited to get to see the inside of this place because we'd heard so much about it. Of course, she has a soft spot in my heart because she's the one who got this show out that most of you are listening to right now. Nobody was pretty much listening. We get a few downloads here and there, but the minute she started talking about our show, boom, and we've never had to look back. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this Redux. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.